Hi everybody, welcome to the very exciting fire cider demonstration video. Before we get started, there are a couple things that you want to know. First of all, the recipe that I am making is very hot. So if you do not like hot and spicy foods, or if you don't do well chopping them, please use the mild version. And there is a PDF that explains the recipe for a milder version. It's the exact same thing, you're just using less spicy ingredients. You'll also notice in the demo video that I'm using my hands and I'm sticking spoons in things. I'm making this batch of fire cider for my family, and I'm making it in actually my parents' kitchen. So, of course, if you're preparing fire cider for a gift or to give to anyone else, we would want to be a little bit more sterile with your spoon usage and whatnot. Also, if you're using fresh horseradish in particular, and also fresh hot peppers in many circumstances, make sure that you're chopping in a well-ventilated space, and consider wearing gloves and a mask, especially if you're very sensitive. And once again, please check out the mild version found as a PDF if you happen to be a sensitive person. Here are a few tips for preventing tears and other adverse reactions provided by a former student. Use a very sharp knife, which means that the cell walls will be chopped more precisely and thus not spray as much. Wooden chopping board sometimes has less splatter than a plastic or glass board. With peppers, if you can avoid coming into contact or disrupting the seeds, then they'll be less likely to burn. And if you didn't wear gloves, go ahead and wash your hands with milk or any kind of dairy-based product afterwards, and that will help with the burning if you weren't very careful about coming into contact with some of the more spicy ingredients. Okay, with that being said, let's watch the demo video.
Hi, this is Camille. Welcome to the video on how to make fire cider. So we're starting out, and you can see I've got here my ingredients, and what I have are some onions chopped up right here. This is garlic, and that's about an entire head of garlic and then maybe 4 or 5 extra cloves. Then I've got a piece of ginger peeled and chopped up, and it was about the size of my palm when I started. And then I have 2 peppers with that were sold to us as hot peppers. I'm not exactly sure what kind they are. They're probably moderately hot, and I prefer red ones, but these are what were available. I'm going to put it all in this jar, just so you have a sense of proportion. And so what I'm going to do now is put them in the jar and cover with vinegar. If I had access to horseradish or fresh thyme, those are 2 ingredients that I would be adding. But I'm in rural South Carolina and we were not able to find those things here. So I'm just going to make do with what I've got. And it's okay to be a little messy. This is not a precise science. So what I'm doing here is just adding it to the jar so we can find out how much vinegar we need. And I like to leave the peppers a little bit big so that it's easy to pull out later. And I'll explain more about that in a moment. And then since I've got a nice clean work surface, I'm just going to dump all the rest in. Okay, if you use red peppers, this is really pretty. So then I'm going to I did find some prepared horseradish, so I'm going to just dump about a tablespoon of that in there as well. And then I'm going to cover the whole thing with organic unfiltered apple cider vinegar. If you can find unfiltered, I think that's best. But if all you've got is regular, that's fine too. So I filled up the jar like so. And then what I'm going to do is actually add it to this pan and heat it up a little bit. And the reason for doing that is because I like to add honey. And so when it's warm, first of all, I think the heat actually speeds along the preparation, and it decreases the length of time you need to let it sit. But it also helps absorb the honey once it's heated up a little bit. So while we're just letting this heat up, while we're letting this heat up a little bit, I wanted to talk about when you would use fire cider. And I also wanted to mention that this is very approximate. So if you want to use any other kind of herbs or spices or anything you can think of that might taste good, just throw it in there. If you like lots of ginger, use more. If you like less garlic, use less. Just do it to taste. So back to the question of when we would actually use fire cider. Well, the main time that you might consider using fire cider is in the fall and throughout the winter. A lot of people will take a swig a day, or approximately a teaspoon, somewhere between a teaspoon and a tablespoon, in an effort to ward off colds, flus, and other wintertime sicknesses. The other place it's appropriate would be if you actually feel a cold or a flu coming on. And a lot of people have a feeling a few days before they get one where they think something's happening, but they're not sure. That's a perfect time to take some fire cider. So like I said, you can either swig it directly out of the bottle. Once you've got everything back in your bottle at the end, you can just leave all of the herbs in the bottle, and you can actually take a big spoonful, including the liquid and the herbs. Or if you prefer just the liquid, that's fine too. Some other things that you can do with your fire cider are drink it for fun, because it actually is quite tasty. You can use it as marinade with or without the herbs. So that's the reason I like to leave the peppers big, so you can take them out if you don't want, some of your guests might not like very spicy peppers. You can also use it as salad dressing. It's quite delicious as a salad dressing. You can use fire cider, if you didn't add honey, you can use it topically for sore muscles. Some people like it for sore joints and that kind of thing. But mostly it's just a delicious daily tonic. All right, so I'm just warming it up to the point where it's at a low simmer. So we just need about a minute more, and I'll prepare my honey. And what I like to do is actually just sample a teeny bit before it starts, so I kind of know where I'm starting from. This flavor will strengthen a lot as you let it sit, but you can get a good sense for the flavor as it is right now. So in something about this size, I would like to use, I'd probably start with about a tablespoon or so of honey, and this is honey that was grown by my cousin. Well, from her bees, not grown by her, of course. So I'm just going to stir that in once the fire cider has just started to simmer. It doesn't need to boil or anything like that. And once you put in the honey, you want to just turn the heat off, because the honey, you don't necessarily need to boil honey. Okay. So I'm just stirring it in, and then what I'm going to do is, once I've got it all stirred in, I'm going to just sample it again. See if I like how sweet it is, and I do. I think that that's a perfect level of sweetness. So I'm going to leave it right there. I'm going to let it cool for a minute, and then I'm going to put the whole thing, including all the herbs, into this jar. And then what I'll do is I'll label it very clearly with fire cider, the date it was made, and exactly what's in it, approximately. And I'll let it sit. And some people like to let it sit for 8 weeks. I think 2 weeks is probably a reasonable amount of time. You can actually use it before then, but it's going to strengthen and strengthen and strengthen. And then at that point, you can either bottle it up, or you can just leave it as is and use it as you like. All right, so let's just dump it in here, and then we'll be done. Okay. Hopefully we have room. That was the point of measuring in the first place. Okay. Perfect. All right. And as you go along, you can actually add more. For instance, if I found some nice fresh thyme that I wanted to add later, I could actually just stick it in there and shake it up, and that would be fine. But anyway, now we've got a nice bottle of fire cider that's ready to macerate for a few weeks. I'll make my label and I'll be done. All right, feel free to email with any questions.